We're waiting for Cliff to pick it up for.
All right. Give me just 1 second. It is activating, and you are on.
Good morning. You get to hear an engineer talk about God today. And of course, every time you hear me, you're hearing an engineer talk. I was raised in a Christian family. I grew up having an awful lot of Bible verses, and it's when you are growing up and you become an adult, that you start probing a little bit deeper into what you pretty much were told or memorized when you were a kid. And I've always had an inquisitive mind, and I continue to probe. I think what Cliff had in the sermon this morning was right on with the understanding of faith. And I think in the understanding of faith, you need a God. You need God. I have a very good friend that doesn't draw the same conclusions I do. But I look all around and I see God. And my friend says you don't need God if you have an understanding of everything. God is only necessary for what you don't understand. And if you understand everything, you don't need God. And I don't understand that, because when I understand things as best I can, I see God in them. So today we're going to probe this a little bit from an engineer perspective. And this is a little bit of a recycle from November the 2nd, 2014. Apparently I had the same things on my mind then. So we will proceed. In the beginning, God created. First verses of the Bible. Important words. Beginning, God, and creation. Let's look at these. What was the beginning? Well, today we maybe have scientific knowledge that nobody had back when the Bible was first written. And our scientific knowledge today says that the theory of the universe's origin centers on this event known as the Big Bang. And that theory was born out of the observation that when you study the stars from the earth, you find everything expanding. It is still expanding at an enormous rate, and they had the ability to figure that out today. So if you say, okay, if it's expanding, it had to start someplace when it wasn't expanding, when it was all together. And that's what leads to the theory of the Big Bang. But what bothers me with this theory of the Big Bang is it's hard to think that there was nothing before that. That sort of blows my mind. There are certain things in this world that blow my mind. And okay, so you go back and you say, and that was the beginning. Well, wasn't there something before that? How can there not be something before that? And what caused the Big Bang? Another fairly important question that I don't think we have the answers to. So when you talk about the beginning, I see evidence of God. Something bigger than the universe that is controlling the universe. So who or what is God? Well, let's see Beetle Bailey. He'll tell us all about this, right? I love the funny papers. So, chaplain, here's what I don't get. If God created the universe, who created God? And the chaplain says, 0, that question has been asked since the beginning of time. So what's the answer? Nobody knows. That's why it's still being asked. So, hard to define God. Had a good friend I taught with in Chillicothe for years, and he said, to define God is to limit God. And we can't do that. Any thoughts on this before I move on? I will move on. Okay, another important word was create. In the beginning, God created. We've covered in the beginning. We've talked about God, and now we're going to talk about create. Well, we understand our solar system. We understand that the sun is bigger than any of the planets. We understand the sun is a star. We understand as a star, it's one of the little stars. There are much bigger stars out there than our sun. And, the clicker. Well, let's see. So, we have all this knowledge. What am I? And we take pictures of the heavens and we discover ours is a galaxy, and the galaxy is a lot bigger than our solar system, and there are billions of galaxies, and some of them are pretty. Many of them are pretty. Aren't those pretty? And they all have names. It clicked once. Okay, so we're back to Charlie Brown now, and we're talking about these galaxies and these stars and all this stuff that's out there. And Linus says, Charlie Brown, if a star fell down here, would you be allowed to put it in a pail and take it home? Well, in the first place, says Charlie, a star is pretty big. You'd never be able to get one in a pail. And Linus says, you wouldn't? Nope, I'm afraid not. So, in the final picture, Linus is throwing his pail away. So, that's the way he deals with too big. And we must remember, in all this creation, we're included too. But the creation includes big things and little things. And this is where Sandy's eyes are going to start glazing over. I hope most of the rest of you don't go the same place. But if you do, I'm still going to do it, so you're stuck with me. How big is big? We're talking about the universe. How big is big? Okay, we'll go to another funny paper. I love the funnies. And here's Brewster Rocket and the scientist in Brewster Rocket, in case you read the funny papers. Now, a scale model of our galaxy. Our scale of the sun, if we said our sun was so small that it was the size of a grain of sand, then you set the sun, that grain of sand, down on our Earth, and you take a speck of dust and you put it 4 inches away from that grain of sand, and you've got the Earth going around the sun. Now, you place 3 grains of sand for the Alpha Centauri, the nearest star system to us, but those have to be placed 18 miles away from where the sun is, that the Earth is only inches away. And to represent the rest of the stars of the Milky Way, just the Milky Way galaxy, you'd need hundreds of billions of objects ranging in size from specks of dust to things as big as a person, just in our galaxy. Now spread the objects out to the moon's orbit, okay? Take all those extra things and go out there at the distance of the moon. And how big is big? It is big, because that's just our galaxy. Now, what bothers me about space, I don't know whether you have the same bothering, but I've thought about this, and it bothers me. How can you have an edge to space? I don't understand limitless space, but I also don't understand space that has a limit. Because if you come up to the wall, and that's where space ends, what's on the other side of the wall? This bothers me. And I don't know whether it bothers any of you. I don't know whether you've thought about it that way. But there are certain things that sort of blow my mind when I try to think of them. And one of them is the edge of space. Okay, now let's go the other direction. How small is small? God made all things big and small. Well, a little bit of wording here, but bear with me. If you were to take a hair off of your head and you were to make it 10 times smaller than it is, that is the extent to which our eye can see anything. Anything smaller than 1/10 of a hair, our eye can't see. That's pretty small. And to go smaller than that, it's working for you. Okay, let's go back one.
Right on the edge of the working.
Okay. I could probably come down there. Okay. Well, okay. Okay, so we're talking about small so far as the human eye is concerned. Now, if you want to go smaller than that, you have to use some of these fairly sophisticated microscopes, including something called the scanning tunneling microscope. That is the most powerful microscope. And it can help us even see atoms, bits of matter that are made up of elements that we know, the atoms of carbon, the atoms of oxygen, the atoms of gold. The atoms of carbon, by the way, are fascinating because there's something called graphene, which will also cause your eyes to glaze over, that takes one layer of carbon and makes unusual stuff out of it. And that's happening right now. Okay, the Greeks thought the smallest thing there could possibly be was the atom. But we have found out there are protons and neutrons and electrons, and now there are even something smaller called quarks. What is a quark? Any of you ever hear of a quark? Sandy has. Unfortunately, she has to listen to me.
He was a character on Deep Space Nine on Star Trek, but I don't think that's who you're referring to.
Okay. Okay, quarks are the smallest thing we know of. And they are 100 quintillion times smaller than the size of a proton. And it's not possible to see anything that small. Yes?
I remember when I was a kid, I think, someone came out with a theory that if you could control all of your, at that time they said atoms, you could walk through a wall because you can make them, interfere so that you could walk through the wall out. I've never seen that happen, but it is amazing.
Sandy's making an interesting point. An atom is mostly space, and it is an atom that makes up everything else. And it's mostly space. So if you somehow had control and you could walk through the space, then you could walk through a wall. Unfortunately, I don't think you can do that, but anyhow, when you come back to quarks, they are so small that in the judgment of scientists, they don't even think they have a size. We think of everything as size. A quark is smaller than size. Okay, so that's pretty small, right? So how small is small? There are building blocks in the universe that are too small to fully understand. And I just think it's amazing that our God created things that are bigger than we can understand, and he created things that are smaller than we can understand. And that building block, the quark, is smaller than the small in my terms. And we haven't even looked at the human part of this creation, which is where there's a lot of evidence for God. Okay, back to Brewster Rocket. And the human part includes DNA. Let's see where this will take us. Oh, human DNA is like a computer code that programming every aspect of our lives. I've summarized the whole program of DNA in this chart. The scientist in Brewster Rocket has put it into this chart. The human, they sleep, they work. If they're not dead yet, because they would stop, they go back and they repeat. Sleep, work, and are you dead yet? Sleep, work, are you dead yet? Interesting cycle, right?
Kind of depressing, but accurate.
What was that?
Kind of depressing, but accurate.
Okay. And Brewster says, I kind of hope there'd be more to it than that. Okay, now you get to religion versus science. And some people think there's an enormous conflict there. And I don't think there's any conflict at all. I think science helps us understand what God has done. And if we have a wrong concept of God, and the science discovery sets us straight, we need to let go of that aspect of God and accept that we are dealing with God's creation and the scientific understanding of it, and we don't understand it all yet. Psalm 8:4. What is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? I think that is so amazing that in this things that are bigger than you can grasp, things that you're smaller than you can grasp, that God cares about human beings. But the Bible tells us that God does. So, how big is God? And any other time I would play the music, and once upon a time I did. I have a bass singer that just sings this so well. But let's see what the words are of How Big Is God, written by somebody named Ray Price, of all people. Though man may strive to go beyond the reach of space, to crawl beyond the distant shimmering, I can't say it, stars, this world's a room so small within my master's house. The open sky's but a portion of his yard. How big is God? How big and wide his vast domain. To try and tell, these lips can only start. He's big enough to rule his mighty universe, yet small enough to live within my heart. And there is more, if I haven't bored you too much. So let's take a look at it. Back to Brewster Rocket. Okay, on science, and we had discussed everything that we know about. There's some stuff we don't understand. There's not enough normal matter in the universe of stars, planets, gas, etc., to make the universe behave as it does, with the physical laws as we understand them. Normal water is represented by this small piece of the puzzle. Big puzzle, water is part of it. If scientists think the missing pieces of the universe are made up of things we don't even understand, something called dark energy and dark matter, dark water pulls these things together, keeps galaxies from flying apart. Dark energy pushes these apart. It accelerates the universe expansion, and although we can't see either, we can see their effects. So, of what we understand, roughly 95% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy that we don't understand. So everything I've just described is only a small portion that we understand. It is bigger than we think. So it looks like God is even bigger than we thought. Wow. That's the lesson. I do have one more slide, but we have a lady in our church that has written a couple books. I got one of them this week. It is called A Tale of Two Worlds. It is by Isabel Berg, who really is Ingrid Georgie. And this is the most fascinating book. I received it this week. It isn't very thick, but I tell you, you will find it extremely interesting. That's Sunday school for today. Sandy.
You answered the presence of God. It makes it, there's something.
Why don't you come up here and use...
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. So I've answered the presence of God, but... Our comprehension.
No.
I think we need to bring it down to something that is like, you all know about the Spoken. He was with us once when one of the scientists talked about all the universe and God was, he said, my God can't be that big, because he has to live within me. And I think that when we try to make God this big, it becomes something that we think we can't cope with.
Sandy makes the point that how can God be that big? Our very good friend, retired minister from this church, Bob McQuilkin, looks at God as a very personal God, a God that is, we can all approach, and he doesn't see what I see as the creator God. He doesn't deny the creator God. That's not his God. His God is a very personal God. Did I say it right?
I think something that we can, if you want to wrestle with along that regard, is that in all things, our views will always be limited. That we only will see so many places in our life. There's so much of the world we will never see. There is so much of our own city we may have never seen. There's parts of our neighborhood we may have never seen. But we know that it's there. We know that it's present. and we can care about it. Now my mind escapes where my glorious conclusion to this statement was going to be, that there's a whole lot of things to still be discovered, that I think that calls us to explore more of the places where we might see God, as opposed to just the places we have seen, and being open to the fact that God is present there as well as not here. One of the kind of limiting things about our Scripture is, as wonderful as it is, it only covers a very small geographic space in the world. And God had to be active in other places too, but this is the lens we look through. And we look through it and we grow from it and we build it up. But we have to believe that God is doing more than just focusing on one piece of land. God's focusing on the whole planet. God is focusing on this universe. But we only get to glimpse certain things at a time. I have a friend that, we come from very different faith backgrounds and we have very different views theologically. But at the end of the day, we still admit that we're two blind people touching an elephant trying to describe it.
Yeah.
We haven't even begun to unpack it. But I think that everywhere you look, you're going to see some God somewhere. No matter how far you look, you can't escape the touch of God. And that's fine. That's fine.
You've heard me say it before, but I'm going to say it again. Homer Watson, Nancy's husband, and I used to have these very interesting conversations. And we used to always conclude that we don't know everything. And when we get up to the pearly gates, we're going to have a list of questions. Well, you've seen two of the questions I'm going to have. And that is, how can space end? And how can there have been a point that there was no time? I don't understand that. So that's on my list. I don't know what's on your list.
Well, Thomas' thing was about what is the soul. He was very much into that.
Yeah.
I think he really thought it was a part of him that related to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Homer actually wrote out for me what his belief of the soul was, and that it contained a part of God, that when you died, it went back to God. And I tested that with a theologian, a minister that we used to have, and he gave me other information that wouldn't necessarily support that God was a part of the soul, but that was a question Homer was going to take to the pearly gates. He's already gotten the answer.
One of the things that I also want to touch on that was in your exploration, you didn't directly go there, but when you talked about length of time, of when does it all start as opposed to here, and as there are those who are literalists who say, no, I've done the math and the Earth is only 6,000 years old or whatever. One of the things that especially as Presbyterians, there's a reason we have to learn the original language so that we can understand the intricacies of it and we can understand translation of it. And one of the things that I have always impressed on every youth group, kids, Sunday school class I have ever had to teach is that the phrase day that we so often see in the creation narrative, the Jewish word that we translate today, the Hebrew word, can also simply mean period of time. So in the first period of time, there was light. In the second period of time. So that doesn't mean it's restricted to a 24-hour clock. And the other great thing, if the sun doesn't come along to the third day, how do you know how long 24 hours is? So don't allow an English translation of a word to keep you from exploring science. They can walk hand in hand just fine if you do the work. So
It's not contradictory the way some people think it is.
Does not be contradictory, no.
Yeah. Okay, well, next week, I'll try to not be quite so technical, but you've seen some of the things that I find interesting, that I like to explore, And now we'll get more back to our Christian beliefs and our Christian living.
And Billy just threw in the chat, just as he always does, if God is God, then God is God. And that's...
If God is God, then God is God, says Billy Walker. Good. Thank you.
Right.
I always think of one of my economics professors in college in money and banking. Maybe you have prerequisites in this course. You wouldn't ask so many questions.
Yes.